Step into a world where history and fantasy collide. This thrilling film takes you on a gripping journey through the life of the iconic President Abraham Lincoln as he battles not only the challenges of his political career, but also a hidden world of vampires. In 1818, Abraham Lincoln lives in Indiana with his parents, Nancy and Thomas. They work at a plantation owned by Jack Bartz. At the plantation, Lincoln makes friends with a young African-American boy named William Johnson. One day, William is getting beaten by a slaver, and Abraham rushes to save his friend. His father, Thomas, tries to stop him. Abraham steps back, grabs an axe, and tries to protect his friend by confronting the man. Unfortunately, the two boys receive whips. Thomas and his wife Nancy rush out to save their son. Thomas knocks the slaver off the river. The owner, Jack Bartz, shows up and accuses the Lincolns of attacking his people. Because of Abraham's actions, they all lose their jobs. Bartz asks for the money they owe, with interest, but they don't have anything to give him. Bartz hints that there are other ways to collect their debts. At night, while Abraham was writing in his notebook, Abraham notices a shadow entering his house and approaching Nancy's bed. It turns out to be the owner, Jack. The next day, Nancy becomes very sick, and even the doctor can't explain why. Abraham lies beside Nancy and reads her a poem he wrote. Sadly, Nancy passes away. At her funeral, Thomas cries and tells Abraham not to seek revenge for his mother. Abraham promises his father that he won't until Thomas dies 9 years later. Later on, Abraham decides it's time for Jack to pay for what he did. 9 years pass, and Lincoln is determined to get revenge against Bartz. One night, after having some drinks at the bar, a man talks to him, but Abraham is only thinking about his revenge. Later, he goes to the plantation, points the gun at Jack, but for some reason, it doesn't work at first. When Abraham runs away, he fixes the gun and eventually shoots Jack in the eye. He throws the gun into the river. Suddenly, Jack appears with the face of a vampire and attacks Abraham. The strange man from the bar shows up and saves Abraham from behind Jack. The next day, Abraham wakes up in a house. Later, he meets Henry Sturgis, who saved him the night before. Henry tells him that vampires exist all around the country, and to hunt them, a person needs to be well trained and live alone. Abraham asks to become a vampire hunter, and Henry agrees. They begin their training together. Abraham picks his first weapon, the axe, since he hasn't had much luck with a gun. Later, Henry takes Lincoln to the woods for training. During the training, Henry tells Lincoln to cut a tree down with one blow, but Lincoln finds it impossible for a regular person. To motivate him, Henry talks to Lincoln about what he hates. This realization empowers Lincoln, and he successfully chops down the tree in one go. Henry tells Abraham that true power doesn't come from hatred, it comes from the truth. Next, Henry teaches the young man to fight in the dark, because vampires can be invisible. They spend years training, and over time, Lincoln becomes very skilled. Henry later shares stories, like Judas betraying Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, suggesting that silver symbolizes betrayal, which is a weakness for vampires. In the bar, Henry also reveals that vampires don't have reflections. Abraham sees Bartz, but Henry stops him, promising to provide him with his targets. Henry wants Abraham to kill the vampire leaders, Adam and his sister Vidoma. Other vampires, including Abraham's enemy Jack Bartz, are descended from them. Vampires have been in the New World for centuries, killing native tribes and early settlers. When Europeans arrive with slaves, they see a chance to create an empire of the undead. Hunters like Henry and Abraham make sure that the nation is for humans, not monsters. In 1837, Lincoln arrives in the town called Springfield. He sees the owner of a grocery store throwing out an employee. Inside, the man introduces himself as Mr. Speed. Lincoln needs a room, but has no money, so Speed, noticing he needs help, offers Lincoln a job in exchange for a place to stay. One day, while working in the grocery store, Lincoln meets a young woman named Mary Todd and is captivated by her. However, he soon discovers that she is engaged to a politician named Stephen Douglas. Lincoln receives a note from Henry about a possible vampire working at the pharmacy in town. As soon as he closes up the store, Lincoln prepares his weapons and sets out. He reaches the pharmacy, goes inside, and finds the man in the back. After Lincoln recognizes him, the man changes into a vampire and attacks Lincoln, throwing him into a cellar where he's hung by his legs. In the cellar, several bodies are also hung, being drained of their blood. The vampire comes down, readying a blade to drain Lincoln's blood. However, Lincoln frees himself and kills the vampire. He buries the corpse deep in the forest, realizing that he still hasn't caught the man he's after. After some time, Lincoln and Speed become friends, and they get invited to a ball where Speed wants Lincoln to have some alone time with Mary. Speed is a good wingman, engaging Stephen in political talk to signal Mary to go to Lincoln. Mary approaches, and Lincoln tells her about his interest in the law and, more recently, his interest in her. Lincoln receives another lead on a vampire working at the local bank. He approaches the seemingly busy man with his axe ready, but the man disappears. Lincoln throws rice around to reveal the man's presence and manages to avoid an attack, ultimately killing the vampire. In his letters to Henry, he mentions that there are more vampires than he expected, but never refuses to take on his missions. During a picnic with Mary, Lincoln struggles to stay awake since he's been working all week and staying up at night. They've been dating for a while, so Lincoln decides to tell her the truth. He reveals that he hunts vampires, but she thinks he's joking. As they walk back home, Mary playfully uses his unusually strong hat to get leverage for a kiss. However, Henry's warnings about the dangers of being a hunter make Lincoln pull away. Unbeknownst to him, Bart is watching Mary closely. Adam and Vidoma learn about their dead associates through the news and realize that Henry is involved. They are eager to meet Lincoln. While Lincoln is at the grocery store, he sees a man entering. The man asks him about the laws on slavery, and it turns out to be Will, his childhood friend. Lately, Will has been helping slaves gain their freedom and searching for his brother. However, he is being pursued by bounty hunters and needs Lincoln to write a legal note declaring him a free man. The two go for a walk, and the bounty hunters attack Will. Lincoln steps in and swiftly defeats the men. As a result, they end up in jail for the fight. Mary comes to find them and assures them they will be released soon. Afterward, Lincoln starts his political campaign to address the issue of slavery from a different angle. He meets Senator Nolan, who offers to connect him with the right people. Henry shows up, and Lincoln informs him that politics is his backup plan since he still can't get the mission he desires the most. Henry discloses that Bart is aware of Mary, and it's time for them to eliminate him. Lincoln quickly heads back to the old plantation with his axe. He nearly corners Bart's, but Bart senses him and evades his strikes. In a fierce horse chase, there's a heated battle between Abraham and Jack. Abraham ultimately defeats Jack by using a gun with his axe. As the vampire lays dying, he warns Lincoln that they, the vampires, will take over the country because there are thousands of them. He then reveals that Henry is also a vampire. That night in an alley, a woman is being harassed by a thug when Henry sneaks up behind him and attacks. As he is feeding, Lincoln enters the alley, confronts Henry, and attacks him. Henry explains that Lincoln wasn't ready to know and shares his own story. It turns out that Henry was a human traveling with his love. When confronted by a gang of vampires, Henry skillfully defeated the first set sent to attack him. However, when facing Adam, he was brutally beaten down. His woman tried to help, but she was held and forced to watch as Henry was bitten by Adam. Helplessly, Henry watched as Adam drained his girl of all her blood, killing her. At that moment, Henry transformed and tried to attack Adam, but by natural law, he couldn't kill another vampire. Lincoln grasps the painful history, but chooses to go separate ways with Henry. He goes back to the shop, where Mary meets him. They go inside, and she notices that Lincoln seems uneasy. It turns out he wants to marry her and proposes on the spot. They soon get married, with William and Speed attending. Henry shows up at the reception, cautioning Lincoln to be careful. However, Lincoln believes that Adam doesn't know him. Meanwhile, Adam examines Bart's corpse in a coffin and notices him clutching Lincoln's pendant. He orders Vidoma to arrange a ball and lure Lincoln to their plantation. At the same time, William is kidnapped by Adam's men, and they send a letter inviting Lincoln to their plantation. To rescue William, Lincoln reveals the whole truth to Speed, and together they travel to New Orleans. Upon reaching the plantation, they find no sign of slaves. They arrive at the massive home where they find William and other slaves dancing with vampires. However, sensing something wrong, the vampires suddenly attack all the slaves. Lincoln storms into the hall to face Adam, and vampires start attacking him. Yet, Lincoln's perfected skills allow him to take down the monsters. William joins the fight, but Vidoma knocks him down with a powerful kick. Lincoln continues to dominate the vampires until Vidoma attacks, pinning him under a chair. Adam, impressed by Lincoln's skills, offers him a deal: kill Henry or be turned into one of them. Adam then prepares to kill William, but Speed bursts into the hall with a carriage, saving Lincoln and William. The three reach a river and encounter a woman in a boat, heading for Ohio. They find refuge in a church, which serves as a hideout for runaway slaves. Vidoma and her men arrive outside, but the priest successfully distracts them. Witnessing the horrors of slavery, Lincoln starts to advocate for the abolition of slavery in his political career. Henry warns that slavery is the only thing keeping vampires in check down south, and removing it will bring chaos. Lincoln decides to retire his axe, and eventually becomes the president of the USA. Years later, the war between the North and the South breaks out. Lincoln and Nancy have a son named Willie. Unbeknownst to them, Vidoma infiltrates the White House, posing as a maid, and enters William's room where she bites the boy. Upon noticing the mark on his hand, Lincoln recalls his mother and becomes troubled with thoughts of his attackers. He spots the locket he lost years ago while fighting Bart's. As he sits by Willie's bedside, Henry pays a visit. Appearing as young as ever, Henry suggests that he can revive the dead, and Mary overhears, urging Henry to do it. She reveals that she read Lincoln's journal and knows about his real vampire hunting activities. Lincoln attempts to explain that Willie wouldn't be the same. Mary blames Abraham for what happened to their boy. Eventually, Abraham decides to send in his Union troops to the battle. The Confederate president receives this news and convinces Adam to send his vampires to the front lines. In the Battle of Gettysburg, Union soldiers face heavy losses at the hands of the vampires. When news of this reaches Lincoln, he becomes worried about potentially losing the war. However, Mary encourages him to stay focused, despite his concerns. Lincoln recalls the vampire's weakness to silver and initiates a plan to collect all the silverware around the states. Speed clandestinely meets with Vidoma, sharing his thoughts about Lincoln's actions tearing the country apart and informing her of Lincoln's intention to transport the silver by train. Mary meets with Harriet Tubman, sharing her need to leave Washington and seeking Harriet's assistance. Realizing his skills are once again required, Lincoln takes up his axe after many years. The train carrying Lincoln, Speed, and William sets out with them on board. Meanwhile, Harriet and Mary are walking along a road when they encounter Adam, Vidoma, and their men. Vidoma nearly discovers Mary, but they hear the approaching train and decide to board it. Henry appears and attempts to tell Lincoln that Speed is a traitor, but Lincoln dismisses the claim. The vampires board the train, and William is the first to be attacked. He puts up a strong fight, and Lincoln eventually joins the fray, reaching the roof where William is battling. Together, they skillfully defeat the vampires. Lincoln faces off against Adam, who kicks him and breaks his axe. When Adam attempts to bite Lincoln, Henry takes the bite, leading to a fierce battle between the two. In the train car, Adam discovers that the silver cargo is, in fact, all rocks. It turns out Speed intended to trap Adam from the start. Abraham had devised the rock plan in advance. Unfortunately, Speed is killed by Adam just before the train crashes into a fire set by Vidoma. Using his watch, Abraham manages to stab Adam, and the three of them finally escape and survive. The silver weapons are secretly transported by Mary and the slaves. With their silver weapons, the soldiers defeat the vampires and eventually win the war. In the heat of battle, Mary avenges her son by shooting Vidoma in the head. Abraham succeeds in revitalizing the U.S. with liberty and only the living. The remaining vampires are forced to escape to other parts of the world. Henry suggests that Abraham become a vampire to be immortal and continue the mission of destroying vampires, but Abraham rejects the idea. In modern times, Henry approaches a young man and speaks to him the way he first met Abraham long ago. And the movie ends here. Thank you for watching, and I highly recommend watching the entire movie as it is incredibly enjoyable. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel, so you can stay updated and receive notifications whenever we upload new videos.